In the American Old West, a man's reputation could be measured in many ways. The size of his ranch, the number of cattle he owned, the gold in his pockets, or the speed of his horse. But among gunfighters, there was another measure entirely: the revolver riding on his hip. For decades, Hollywood has filled the public imagination with images of quick draws and dramatic shootouts. Yet behind the legends stood a very real firearm that earned the trust of lawmen, outlaws, ranchers, soldiers, and professional gunfighters alike. A revolver so successful that it remained in production for generations. A revolver carried by Wyatt Earp, favored by Bat Masterson, used by Texas Rangers, trusted by countless frontiersmen whose names history has forgotten. It became known by many names: the Peacemaker, the Frontier Six-Shooter, the gun that won the West. Officially, it was the Colt Single-Action Army, and for much of the American frontier, no revolver commanded greater respect. A new revolver for a changing West. By the early 1870s, the American frontier was changing rapidly. The Civil War had ended. Railroads pushed farther westward every year. Buffalo hunters roamed the plains. Cattle drives stretched from Texas to Kansas. And the United States Army remained deeply involved in the Indian Wars. Amid this changing landscape, military officials sought a new sidearm. The result arrived in 1873. That year, Colt introduced a revolver that would become one of the most famous firearms in history: the Colt Single-Action Army. At first glance, it seemed simple. 6 chambers, a sturdy frame, a single-action mechanism requiring the hammer to be cocked before each shot. No complicated features, no unnecessary innovations, just reliability. And on the frontier, reliability mattered more than almost anything else. A firearm that failed at the wrong moment could cost a man his life. The Colt earned a reputation for doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Every time. Many revolvers appeared during the 19th century. Some were powerful. Some were innovative. Some disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. The Colt Single-Action Army endured. Why? Because it offered a combination of qualities few competitors could match. First was durability. The frontier punished equipment relentlessly. Dust blew into every mechanism. Rain soaked leather holsters. Extreme temperatures tested metal parts. Yet the Colt continued functioning under conditions that destroyed lesser firearms. Second was balance. Gunfighters frequently commented on how naturally the revolver pointed. It felt comfortable in the hand, quick to bring on target, easy to control. Third was power. Most famously chambered in .45 Colt, the revolver delivered substantial stopping power. On the frontier, where encounters could involve hostile attackers, dangerous animals, or desperate criminals, that mattered a great deal. The revolver of Wyatt Earp. No discussion of frontier firearms can ignore Wyatt Earp. Though countless myths surround his life, one fact remains clear. Earp lived in a world where firearms were tools of survival. Whether serving as a lawman in Dodge City, Tombstone, or elsewhere, he depended upon reliable weapons. Like many professional lawmen of the era, Earp used revolvers built by Colt. The exact details of every firearm he carried remain debated among historians. But Colt revolvers occupied an important place in his career. When people imagine the gunfight at the OK Corral today, they often picture revolvers. Yet the reality was more complicated. The fight involved multiple weapons, including shotguns. Still, the revolver remained the sidearm most commonly associated with men like Earp. And no revolver became more closely linked with frontier lawmen than the Colt Single-Action Army. Bat Masterson's preference. Bat Masterson understood firearms as well as nearly anyone on the frontier. Buffalo hunter, scout, lawman, gunfighter, newspaper columnist. His life touched nearly every aspect of the American West. Masterson often praised Colt revolvers. Like many experienced gunmen, he valued reliability over flashy claims. A weapon did not need to be revolutionary. It needed to work. Again and again. Under pressure, the Colt met that requirement, and countless other lawmen reached the same conclusion. Outlaws carried them too. The Colt's popularity was not limited to law enforcement. Outlaws appreciated good firearms just as much as sheriffs. Perhaps more. Billy the Kid carried Colt revolvers. So did members of numerous outlaw gangs operating across the frontier. Train robbers, cattle rustlers, and fugitives often selected the same weapons used by the men pursuing them. The reason was obvious. The Colt worked. When a man's future depended upon a firearm, reputation mattered. The Colt had earned one of the strongest reputations in the West. As a result, it appeared on both sides of the law. The badge did not determine the choice. Performance did. The Revolver of the Texas Rangers. Few organizations inspired greater respect than the Texas Rangers. Operating across enormous territories, Rangers faced nearly every challenge imaginable. Bandits, murderers, rustlers, frontier warfare, remote patrols, long pursuits. They needed equipment capable of surviving hard service. The Colt revolver became one of their most trusted tools. Many Rangers considered it indispensable. A dependable horse and a dependable revolver formed the foundation of survival in dangerous country. The Colt provided that confidence. Over time, the relationship between Colt firearms and the Rangers became legendary. And for good reason. Both developed reputations for toughness. Not the fastest. The most trusted, one of the greatest misconceptions about Old West gunfighting involves speed. Modern audiences often imagine gunfighters obsessing over quick draws. In reality, survival depended far more on judgment, nerve, and accuracy. A fast draw meant little if the weapon malfunctioned. This is where the Colt excelled. Professional gunmen valued consistency. They wanted a revolver that felt familiar. One they could trust under stress, one that became almost an extension of the hand. The Colt single-action army achieved exactly that. Its simplicity became its greatest strength. Complicated mechanisms could fail, simple designs often endured. The Army adopts the Colt. The Colt's reputation received a major boost when the United States Army adopted it. Military contracts exposed thousands of soldiers to the revolver. Many carried it during the Indian Wars. Among cavalrymen riding the Great Plains, the Colt became a familiar companion. The revolver appeared during some of the most famous campaigns of the frontier era. Its presence on military belts helped spread its reputation even farther. Soldiers who left the Army often carried their preferences into civilian life. Many continued purchasing Colts long after their service ended. As a result, the revolver's influence expanded across the frontier. Why it outlasted its competitors. The West witnessed countless firearms. Some appeared briefly before fading into obscurity. Others achieved temporary popularity. Yet the Colt single-action army endured. Part of that success came from timing. It arrived when the frontier needed it most. Part came from performance. Users trusted it. But perhaps most importantly, it became woven into the culture of the American West itself. The revolver accompanied cattle drives, protected ranches, served lawmen, armed soldiers, and traveled alongside settlers moving toward new opportunities. Wherever the frontier advanced, Colts often traveled with it. The legend grows. As the Old West faded into history, the Colt's reputation only grew. Novelists wrote about it. Filmmakers featured it. Collectors sought it. Historians studied it. The revolver became more than a firearm. It became a symbol of a turbulent era when fortunes could be won or lost in a single season. When law and disorder often existed side by side. When survival depended upon preparation, courage, and occasionally a reliable six-shooter. The Colt single-action army stood at the center of that world. Many firearms competed for attention during the American frontier era. Some were more powerful. Some were more advanced. Some introduced innovative features. Yet none earned the widespread trust enjoyed by the Colt single-action army. Lawmen carried it. Outlaws carried it. Texas Rangers relied upon it. Soldiers marched with it. And countless ordinary frontiersmen trusted it with their lives. That trust was not built through advertising. It was earned through years of hard use in some of the harshest country on earth. And that is why, when people speak of the gunfighter's favorite revolver of the Wild West, one name continues to rise above the rest. The Colt single-action army, the peacemaker, the six-shooter that became a frontier legend.